Ishwaram, as resplendent sun. It's the start of a bright new day. Time to rise, time to shine, Lord divine. Time to lead us along life's way. Awake, Lord of Buddha party. Awake, O Lord, over all mankind. Awake, O Lord of compassion, that the world good fortune may find.
It's very wonderful to introduce either of the two speakers that we've got for this conference. This morning, one of the speakers will speak, and then again tomorrow, and then tomorrow in each afternoon session we'll have the other speaker. But all of us know, of course, Dr. Hislop. We have read his books. He's been described accurately as the Westerner, that is the the overseas person, or the non-Indian, who has had more interviews and more time, more opportunity to consult with, ask questions of Swami than anyone else. He has just had, for whatever reason, a spectacular opportunity to get in a position where he could ask the kinds of questions we would all like to have answers of. And he has this ability, this unique quality. Swami has graced him with this ability in response to him, where when Swami gives what is not yet for us the answer we want, a complete answer, Jack is able to persist and not get Swami angry, but get Swami to elucidate more. And so we can read conversations, we can read my Baba and I over and over and over again, because what he does is he goes in and without a tape recorder and without, I guess, without a lot of ego, he's able to listen very carefully. He records these things, he makes notes of them right after he comes out of those sessions, and then he's willing to share. And of course in the my Baba and I, you see that he has shared not only these reports, but letters that Swami has written to him. And another thing about Jack is that he is not at all shy about sharing the times when Swami admonishes him. He tells us just as it is. And through the years, people have, on occasions, wondered if this is a particular accurate quote. I can assure you that he is extremely dedicated. He doesn't pull punches. He just tells us and he shares with us, and it's a great opportunity. Swami just can't, in the physical sense that we're in, make these things available to each and every one of us. So he chooses instruments at various times, and he's chosen Jack Hislop to do this. It's our duty to go forward and take advantage of that. And he gets better and better every year, Jack does. He seems to have more energy now than he had 8, 10, 12 years ago. He I remember, I guess it was in Indiana, one of our 3rd or 4th annual conferences, and I was trying to introduce him at that point, and I said, it's reminiscent of Arjuna, when he is the one chosen by Swami to receive the Gita. And the question was asked, why not the older brother, Dharmaraja, who was the epitome of Dharma and so forth? And Swami at that time said that it was because Dharmaraja was the embodiment of Dharma, but he had hindsight. He would ask questions and reflect on things after they happened. Arjuna would ask before they would happen, and therefore would have an opportunity not to make some of the mistakes. And I think that's one of the things that Jack does for us. He asks these questions of Swami. He goes into great, great detail. He listens to us when he comes among us. And when he doesn't have the answer, he makes a note. And the very next time he goes to Prashant Nilium, he makes it a point to ask Swami that particular question. So while he's here, you have the opportunity. Alan mentioned that he's going to be available for some special private so-called times, but he's always available the whole 3 days that he's here. And if you can catch him walking back, normally in these public sessions, you ask questions that are of general interest. Those private sessions are when you have personal questions, sort of like Swami does. But he's available, and he doesn't mind your asking questions on top of questions. As a matter of fact, he's a little bit upset if you don't take advantage of the time that he's here. So you go ahead and ask him as many questions as you want to. And I'm going to now step aside and give you the opportunity of hearing a presentation from our beloved Dr. John Hislop.
Pranams from the Lotus Feet. Fellow Sai devotee. My voice doesn't sound very loud to me. Can you hear me back there? You can? Okay. I'm very happy that you invited me to come here once again. I thoroughly enjoy being at the St. Louis conference. I've been here a number of times and have been fortunate enough to make many very good friends amongst you, and it's always a happy occasion for me when I have the chance to see you again and the chance to have conversation with you again. Before I start talking about Swami, I would like to make just a couple of remarks. To follow up on what Bill just finished saying about large cities perhaps should have several centers. That was Swami's original idea when he first formed the American Sathya Sai Baba organization. He said, it would be good to have a number of medium-sized or small centers scattered geographically in an area. And then once a month or once every 2 months, those centers could meet together and have a speaker and invite interested members of the public to that meeting. So what Bill is suggesting is exactly what Swami himself has said many years ago. The personal question sessions that they mentioned started several years ago in Vancouver, British Columbia, at their request when I attended their conference there. And I want to tell you that those of you who would like to ask questions privately, that I don't give any personal advice. What I do is you ask a question, and if I know Swami's answer to that question, and I've heard Swami speak so often during the past 20 years, that almost invariably I can remember something that Swami said that would apply to that question. So you get what Swami said, and I don't add personal remarks. If I don't know, I just say, sorry, I don't know the answer to that question. I should, and I want to, tell you something that happened last weekend at the council meeting in San Diego. There was a unanimous endorsement and unanimous approval of your own Bill, Dr. Bill, as the acting chairman of the executive committee, and therefore the acting chairman of the entire American Sathya Sai Baba organization. Why not give Bill a hand? I can tell from your response that you also endorse that appointment. Have you noticed the beautiful work they've done in front of the altar, that lovely arrangement of the flowers and the designs and the altar itself. You know, Swami said that there is the Atma and there is the spiritual teaching and there is the longing for enlightenment. But even so, a teacher must come and impart that sacred information to you. And when it comes to Atma Vidya, the science of the self, the sacred science of the self, then the one who comes to teach you is the world teacher. It is God himself who comes. So the one who has come to teach us the science of the self, the sacred information about the self, is the world teacher, is God himself, is Sathya Sai Baba. Now, there is in India a periodical called The Indian Skeptic, and they engage themselves in practicing skepticism in relation to everybody in the spiritual field. That is, they believe that everyone is a fake, including Swami. And they especially criticize Swami when he says that I am the divine, I am God. The editor sent me 3 copies. So I replied to him and told him that over the last 20 years, my conclusions were quite contrary to his, having seen Swami hundreds of times. And I said that those who criticize Swami for saying that he is God at least should be fair and should complete the sentence, because Swami never stops there. He invariably completes the sentence and says, yes, I am God, but so are you. And the only difference between us is that I know my truth, and you as yet do not know your truth. But otherwise, we are exactly one and the same. The last time I was there, Swami would pass me several times, and each time he would hit me on the shoulder and say, Hislop, no difference between you and me. So that is what he says, always has said, and continues to say it, that you are God. And he says the greatest sin that can be committed by a person is to think that he is other than God, and then fill his mind with thoughts of cravings and of hatred. The man fills his mind with cravings, desires, hatreds, and dislikes, and from that all the troubles that assail the world arise. Now, as Bill said, it is true that I have had many, many conferences with Swami. In the old days, the beginning days, there was hardly anybody on the campus there at Prasanthi Nilayam. The first time I came, my wife and I, in January of 1968, there were only 6 or 8 foreign people in the entire campus. There were no new buildings, just the Mandir, before the present additions to the Mandir, and 2 or 3 old ramshackle buildings in which a few people lived. And Swami, when we came, put the men in one room, old, dusty, dirty room, and the ladies in another, and then he would come every morning and spend an hour and a half or 2 hours talking to us, and come back in the afternoon and spend an hour and a half or 2 hours talking to us, day after day, for all the 10 days that we were there. Ask him any question that we wanted to, and he would answer. And he would send food to us, and a peculiar thing we noticed was that the food came in these Indian canisters, various segments for different kinds of food. And when we started, there were perhaps 8 foreigners and perhaps 6 or 7 Indians in the group. And gradually, their schedules took them away, and they left. And when it was down to about 4 of us, we noticed the peculiar thing, and that was that the level of food in the canisters stayed precisely the same, no matter how many people had been taking food from the canister. When there were the 12 or 14 people, the canister went down the food level a certain amount. When there were only 4 or 5 of us, exactly the same amount. So the food just multiplied naturally. And of course, in those early days also, Swami himself would walk through the crowd and individually give every person sweets and sometimes amrit out of a container. And although there might be 2,000 or 3,000 people there, yet the little container that Swami carried never was empty, always was full. And so I've had all those talks with Swami. In the early days, when we were first there, the first couple of years, we were staying in a room which faced Swami's room above the mandir. And he didn't have anyone to talk to. So he would come to the window and wave me like that. Come up, Hislop. Come up and talk. So I would come up into the room and we would have a long chat. One time I asked him, I said, Swami, you have the job, I don't say you, I never address him in the second person, always the third person. I said, Swami, Swami has to look after the entire universe. The stars, the distant galaxies. He has to look after all the people in the world, the people who worship God that don't even know about Swami, he takes care of them too. The colleges, the schools, devotees in all parts of the world. With that tremendous burden of work, how does Swami have time to sit here and talk to the likes of me? And he said, well, Hislop is not like that at all. He said, it's like when you start a car and you turn the key in the car and the engine starts and then the engine just runs. No attention is needed to it. So he said, the universe is like that. Swami turns the key, the universe, all parts of the universe work, and no attention is needed, so I have plenty of time, Hislop, to sit here and talk to you. So then also, for many years, I would say 5 or 6 years at least, wherever Swami went, he would take me with him in the car, no matter where he was going, whether out to lunch or to some other city or whatnot. And I would sit in the front seat and in the back seat with the driver. In the back seat would be Swami sitting in the middle, and then there would be a couple of persons close to Swami. Roger Reddy used to be one on one side. And Vittal Rao, I don't know how many of you knew Vittal Rao before he died. Very nice man, Vittal Rao. Swami liked him very much. He was a very witty man and could always make Swami laugh, but knew exactly where to stop. You know? Never stepped 1 inch over the proper boundary. So Swami always had Vittal Rao with him whenever he went in the car. And then Vitterau died, and the people in the back car started to change. Dr. Bhagawan would be there, Jogurao would be there, and so on. And so in these car trips, also I would be turning back all the time, straining my neck, looking back, because the back seat was where the action was. And Swami would sometimes be talking to the two fellows there in Telugu. Sometimes he would sing bhajans, and sometimes he would answer questions. And I had the terrible reputation of always asking questions. So I would ask questions, and Swami would answer the questions, and then as soon as the car trip finished, I would go to a quiet place and write down everything that was said. If we had a half an hour, an hour's conversation, it might take me 4 hours to reconstruct the conversation. But then I would take that conversation to the other people who were in the car or in the group interviewing Swami, wherever Swami and I happened to be, and would ask them to read and point out any omissions or any errors of commission in what was written. So even though it came from my memory, all the talks and the conversations were verified by other people. So they aren't wild reaches of imagination. Sometimes people have come to me and said, well, why didn't you tape them, Hislop? It would be much more believable if we could listen to a tape. Well, that's true. It's a very good idea, and I tried that. I carried a tape when I first came there, and Swami let me use it a couple times. And so one time I said to him, this was when the old cottage was there at Brindavan, before this new lotus-like building which is now there, which is a new home. And that cottage had a big veranda. And so I said, Swami, what Swami says should be recorded for posterity. All these wonderful things are said and nobody puts them down or does anything about them. So I said, that's right, it should. So I said, all right, Swami, when shall I come tomorrow morning? Well, you come at 10 o'clock. All right. So I would come at 10 o'clock, have the tape recorder there, and then I would ask a question and put the machine on. And Swami would say, I don't think that one should be recorded. So off went the machine. Until finally he told me, Hislop, don't use that tape recorder anymore. He said, the tape recorder is up here in your mind. And very often people ask, I want to love Swami, but I don't find any feeling of love in my heart. So how can I learn how to love Swami? And so I asked Swami that same question. And Swami said, well, Hislop, it's like this. He said, when you were walking by the shop window and saw that tape recorder in the window, you didn't have any affection for it. It was just a piece of merchandise in the window. But when you went in and bought it and it became yours, now you would love it. Every place you go, you carry it. So what is yours, you love. The mother loves, even though she may be sympathetic to, and very tender to, and be loving to the other children on the block. She loves her own child. It belongs to her. So it's the same way with Swami. If we want to have a strong, happy, joyful feeling of love for Swami, we should consider that Swami belongs to us. He is ours. He's part of us, just beneath the surface of our consciousness. There is Swami. I have to say to Swami, Swami, when I start to be quiet and look within myself, sort of try to dive in myself, after I get a certain distance inside. Then it seems to me that it's no longer Hislop there, it's Swami. It's Swami who's there. So Swami said, yes, yes, Hislop, that is exactly true. It is Swami who's there. Now, there's an example of that. This last year, in February, when I was in Prasanthi. I wasn't there very long, just 2 weeks, because my wife can't travel any longer, that long trip. And they had a series of talks. You see, there's what's called the central office of the Sathya Sai Baba Seva Organization now. Their office is in Prasanthi. Those of you who have been there, you know where the old lecture hall is. Then down at the corner where it joins the bank of apartments, there's a corner room. And that's their office. And so they are supposed to run the ashram. You know, Mr. Kutumarao is dead. He died from cancer. And so this group of people, 3 people, are supposed to now take care of the ashram. And so they immediately, when I arrived, arranged a series of lectures to the foreign community. You know, the custom in Prasanthi for some years has been that the foreigners come, and since there's nothing to do and they're not accustomed to sitting quietly, they tend to go out of their apartments and then wander out into the village and talk to the merchants and make friends with the merchants, and then they start to eat the village food, and for all they know, 5 minutes before they ate, a lizard fell from the ceiling into the food, and they get sick. And especially the girls from Italy, they have a lot of trouble. They make friends, go out in the village, make friends with these Kashmiri people. And then trouble follows, a lot of trouble follows. So Swami is constantly advising the people who go there, don't leave the campus. They have shops, everything that you want to buy can be bought on the campus. The food is there, it's clean, even though it may not be much competition to the highest priced restaurant in your own town. Nevertheless, the food is good and it's clean. And Swami wants people to stay. So as part of that program, at 11 o'clock every day, there's a talk to the foreigners with the hope that they will go to the talk instead of wandering out on the streets. So they made a series of 3 lectures for me on those days. And then the 4th one was to be a question and answer session. So I gave the 3 lectures, and then came the 4th one, the question and answer session. Swami, incidentally, was calling me in every morning. I was in 6 or 7 times during the couple of weeks that I was there. He would say, come in, come in. Then I'd go and sit in the room with him and with the editor of the Sanatana Sardi, Narasimham. And so Swami called me in this morning after I'd given the question and answer session. And he said, Hislop, all you did was confuse the people. Now, you know, the lecture hall is a long ways away from Swami's little room. You know where the mandir is, and Swami has a room. There's only one little tiny window way up on the wall, and the door's always closed. And during the time that he's not upstairs privately, he's having continual conferences with people about schools, about construction, and so on, in that little room. So that little room, with its one little window, full of people, is a long ways away from the lecture hall. So how did Swami know I had confused people? So I said, well, Swami, how do you mean? So he said, well, when people ask questions, you responded from viewpoints with which they were not familiar. That is, you had a certain understanding of something, and from that you made their response. And they didn't understand what you said, and then they would ask another question based on what they didn't understand, and that created more and more confusion. He said, that's not the medicine the people need. Why don't you just tell them Swami's teachings? So, now think of that. There he was in his room, and yet he heard every word that I said in that lecture hall, and he could see into the minds of the people, see, that they weren't understanding some of the answers I gave. There was confusion. So, believe me, Swami is every place at all times. Now, the following day, I had agreed to have a question and answer session with the Italians from Rome. The Italians, there are so many of them there, and they don't seem to have much to do with each other from the various cities. Now, the Rome group wanted me, and I had forgotten the name of the leader, and so I asked some other Italians that I said there was this meeting we were having, and who should I speak to find out the exact time. Well, they finally pointed out the person, but they didn't have the slightest interest in coming to the meeting of the Roman group. So they're divided. So I had this question and answer session with the Roman group, and then Swami called me again in the next morning. And so I said, Swami, did I do any better yesterday? And Swami said, yes, and stuff, you did better. You said Swami's teachings, but there was that trouble with the language. Well, yes, Swami. None of the Italians spoke English, so there was a so there was a translator. And he said, yes. And he said, then you didn't explain very well to that man who was confused about Jesus. So I said, well, Swami, I think his confusion arose from the previous day where he didn't understand what was said. But I thought he was finally satisfied. Now the room, shed number 13, where the Italians were, was 3 times as far away from Swami as the lecture hall. And moreover, there were there was the big foreign cafeteria and the big multi-story residential place between Swami's room and the shed 13. Even by visual you can't see it. And yet there, he knew everything that went on. Translator, the fellow about Jesus, and so on. So you can be sure that Swami is here in this very room at this very moment. He knows everything that you're thinking about. Why? Because you are he. If you feel, he feels. If you think, he records the thought. He's you, inside of each one of us. And Swami says that our greatest sin is to deny that and not to realize that, and to instead let the mind get filled with thoughts of hatred and cravings, giving rise to all the trouble in the world. Now, our first speaker brought up the topic of Advaita. He gave some comments and cited some instances of the Advaita philosophy. And I think that we should have a fairly reasonable concept of what Advaita is all about. Because Swami more and more is making remarks based on the Advaita philosophy. And in fact, he said in a couple of discourses that we should now study and learn something about Advaita. Now, what is Advaita? Advaita is part of Vedanta. It's the Vedanta analysis of the human person. Just as a scientist in the laboratory dissects an insect or a plant or a tree or whatever he's studying in minute detail. If he's operating on an animal or a cadaver, for example, he tries to get insight into all the thousands of little nerves in the body and how they affect one another. It's a minute analysis of the subject under investigation. So in the Advaita philosophy, then, there is made such a minute analysis of the human person. Now, you've all heard about Maya and all sorts of things said about Maya. The whole thing, as regards our own life here in the world, starts with, although they say starts with, and then they say it's eternal, so therefore there's no beginning or no end. But at any rate, in the indivisible divine, can't be divided, the universal consciousness. By the way, when I was talking to Swami, as I just was telling you the story, I finally said to him, Swami, how is it that you know everything that I say and everything that was in the minds of the people in these meetings we had? How are you there? Are you there as Ishvara? How are you there, Swami? How do you know that? This room has walls and only a window. You can't see through those walls. Who can see through those walls? How were you in that meeting, Swami? So he said, Hislop, I was there as universal consciousness. He is universal consciousness. That consciousness which informs every thing of creation, even sticks and stones have that consciousness. You remember the story of, if you happen to read in the book, the story of the saris in Bombay, where the saris started to weep and cry, and the box was all wet from their tears, because Swami rejected them and sent them back to the merchant. He wouldn't take them to use as gifts for the ladies he wanted to make gifts to. So even the granite, the stone, has consciousness, although it can't speak. In fact, Swami says that this process of evolution, which has the present result of all we human beings sitting together in this room, starts with the granite. And then, for that consciousness is locked up in the granite. Then that consciousness makes a quantum leap, not an incremental advance, but a quantum leap from the granite to the vegetable, the vegetation. After all, the stone crumbles and makes soil and minerals, and the vegetation uses that for its growth. So the consciousness makes a quantum leap and becomes the consciousness of the vegetable. Then the vegetation is eaten by animals. They survive on the vegetation. And consciousness then makes another quantum leap from the vegetable to the animal. And then we humans eat animals. Animals become part of our flesh and blood, part of the mind even. In fact, Swami says that this tremendous expansion of population in the world, which is giving headaches and heartaches to so many countries trying to figure out how to deal with it, comes largely because of the worldwide custom of eating animals. All over the world we eat animals, and these animals then come into the human birth, more and more and more and more human beings. So from the animal then, there's again a quantum leap into mankind. And in mankind, then awareness, very acute awareness arises. And we are aware of ourselves. We are aware that we are alive. And therefore can start to think about our lives and try to distinguish the false from the true. The animal, Swami says, is alive, but it doesn't know that it's alive. It doesn't know life. It is alive and lives, but doesn't know it's alive, and therefore can't make inquiry. whereas we know we are alive and then can start the process of inquiry. Then the next step in evolution is from human to superhuman, and from superhuman to the spiritual, and from the spiritual to the divine. So I asked Swami, well, Swami, stone, vegetation, animal, and man, we can all see, we all know. But how about this next step? The superhuman, who's superhuman? We don't see superhumans. Are those people, Swami, up in the Himalayas mountains, who can walk on water and walk through a mountain and levitate themselves and fly away to other planetary systems and so on? So I says, no. Those are just people trying to get liberated. They're not superhumans. They're just human beings trying to get liberated. Well then, Swami, who's superhuman? He said, superhuman people are like, then he named several of the ancient saints, Vashishta, and so on. And he said, those people have completely finished with human life. They don't have any desires or any cravings or any fears, don't have any of those aspects of human life which causes us to engage in actions which then creates our human world. They are quite separate from all those aspects of craving, fear, hatred, and so on. So they've totally finished with human concerns. And any action that they engage in is for the benefit of humanity. So those are the superhumans. That's the superhuman stage. So I said, well, Swami, all the ones you mentioned lived thousands of years ago. How about now? So I said, oh, yes, there are many now. So I said, Swami, where are they? I don't see them. They said, oh, they are very careful to keep a low profile. They just live quietly and nobody knows. So I'd asked him before if there were liberated people today, and he said, oh, yes. And again, where are they, Swami? Well, mostly they're in the foothills of the Himalayas, and if you happen to come upon one, he'll just turn and walk away. He won't even talk to you. And I said, well, how about the West, Swami? Any in the West? Oh, yes. There are liberated people in the West. And again, he said, they keep a very, very low profile, and you don't know that they are there. So maybe amongst us here, we have some superhumans and some liberated people. Possible? We wouldn't know, only they know. So, then how does all this business of evolution, coming up to the human and beyond the human, this is all part of Advaita. How does that start? In the indivisible divine, the universal consciousness, Maya arises without motivation, without incentive. Swami says, just like a bubble of air rising from the mud at the bottom of the lake and then coming to the surface and bursting on the surface, just like in a fire, sparks fly out of the fire. Now the sparks are not different from the fire. They are part of the fire, and yet they spring away from the fire and have a separate existence. In that same way, in the universal consciousness, in the indivisible absolute, Maya arises. And Maya then manifests itself as mind. Maya manifests as mind. And as soon as mind is manifest, then all of the tendencies which lie at the root of the mind start to flower and grow and then manifest as the external universe. So the mind creates the external universe. Now, as Adi Shankara You all are familiar with the name Adi Shankara, the great Indian philosopher of the early Middle Ages, who was fully liberated at the age of about 5 or 6, and then walked throughout India teaching. And he's the one who, from the Vedas, codified the Advaita philosophy. And according to him, and we can all see that what he says is true, and Swami has repeated the same. You know, Swami says, I do not teach other than what has been taught for ages past. So, he points out that in our lives, right now, or any time, the only thing that we experience directly, you know, direct experience, not secondhand, not implied, but whoop, see, directly I touch this and move the cover. That's direct, nothing in between. The only thing in all of our existence that we experience in that way directly, without something else being in between, is our thoughts. Our thoughts we experience directly. That's the only thing we experience directly. Therefore, everything else that we experience is the result of thought. Thought, then, manifests as all the objects of the world. Now, they point out that we can quite easily understand that, even though when it's said, as I have said it, it seems strange, odd, and unbelievable. Yet, if we will think of our dream, we go to sleep, and this material world, this solid material world, which we have to be so careful, otherwise we injure ourselves and injure others and so on, this solid material world doesn't exist for us in the dream. It's completely disappeared. We're gone in the dream world. And yet, in that dream world, there manifests a universe just as solid and as real to us as this one is now. Isn't that true? And yet, every aspect of that dream world comes from our mind. We are dreaming, and that dream world is formed out of mind stuff. There's just ourselves dreaming. And out of the mind dreaming is formed that entire world. The buildings, the animals, the people. If we meet with our grandfather, even somebody who was born before us, we look at a building which was built 1,000 years ago in a fantasy. Whole world made just out of the mind stuff, which we accept as being real. So much so that if we have a dream hunger, what will satisfy the dream hunger? Only a dream meal. If we have a dream illness, how can we get cured? Only through a dream doctor. And what can we do to help the dreamer? Nothing. Just imagine a small little child in bed with mother and father. And the little child is having a terrible dream. It's being beaten or suffering terribly. Now, no matter how much the child is suffering, who can help it? Can mother and father help it? They don't even know. But if the little child would just wake up, then all its suffering would immediately disappear. Okay? So therefore, just as in the dream world, something may occur to wake us up from the dream. Perhaps with a little child, the mother turns it over or something, or maybe we're in some place and a lion gives a roar, and that wakens us out of the dream. And we're free from all the suffering and misery in that dream. Why? Because we've been wakened from the dream. We're no longer caught up in the dream. Now, in the same way, Swami tells us directly, as do the ancient saints and sages, that when we have experienced self-realization or enlightenment, from that stage, from the stage of enlightenment, of self-realization, from that stage, this world, this waking world, is just as much a dream as is the dream world to us from the standpoint of the waking world. Just as much a dream. So I said to Swami, Swami, this, you say, this waking world that we're in right now, I'm sitting here talking to you, Swami, and you tell me that this waking world has no reality. It's just a myth, a dream. But then, Swami, I see you in this myth, in this dream, working day and night. That sounds sort of odd, Swami. How can that be? If it's useless, just a dream, what are you doing here working so hard in this dream? Eh? You understand the question? So, Swami said, I come into the dream just with the hope that I can awaken you. Eh? So, the Lord, Ishvara, the universal consciousness, takes the form of Swami in this waking dream. And what is his purpose? His purpose is to awaken us from the dream of misery and despair and trouble that we experience in this world. You see, why do we have this longing for eternal life? Why do we come here? Because life is intolerable. And because it is not our natural state. Were it our natural state, then we wouldn't have the desire to change, to be something else. So we become interested in spiritual life because to us we have reached the point where life is intolerable. Otherwise, why do you drive 16, 18, 20 hours to come to this meeting? If you were so happy and satisfied, why wouldn't you stay home and look at the TV and go to a baseball game or something? Or just go out and have a good meal? Why? Because it's intolerable to you, that's why. You know that you're suffering, and you want to wake up. And here comes Swami, the Lord of creation, the Lord of all, here only to wake us up. Now, we should understand from the Advaita. Am I boring you with Advaita? You sure? Okay, because we can go with something else. All right. See, how is it that if we are now liberated, and we are, Swami and all the great sages say that you can't, liberation for us is not something that is new, that can be achieved. Because liberation is the eternal state. And being eternal, it must already be here. You follow me? Since universal life, universal consciousness is eternal, never beginning, never ending, then it must already be here. Liberation must already be here at this very moment. Doesn't have to be achieved. Swami specifically tells us that the difference between bondage and liberation, as being bound and not being bound, being liberated, free, that there is no difference between those two. There is no essential difference between the state of bondage and the state of liberation. No essential difference. Because the state of bondage is simply a mental idea. In our minds, we consider ourselves as these miserable, small human beings, heir to all the ills of the world, and refuse to consider ourselves as being the eternal absolute. We refuse to do that. And so, how do we make that terrible mistake? How do we make the terrible mistake of being free, being liberated this very moment, and yet thinking that we are bound, and coming all these miles to try and find out how to get liberated? How do we make that mistake? Well, the science of Advaita then looks very carefully into such things and makes the analysis, tries to see the truth of the matter. Now, we make the mistake because we take appearance for reality. We take that which is not true as being real. Now, for example, it doesn't happen so much here in America because the snakes come out only at a certain season. But in India, a person walking at dusk, this is one of the favorite illustrations used by the sages, so we use the same one. At dusk, a person is walking on a path, and he sees before him a coiled snake, and hesitates and reacts, and maybe engages in some action like running away, or who knows what action he may engage in. And then it's found that that is just a coiled rope, not a snake at all. So what is the situation there? The situation there is that there was ignorance of the rope. See? We were ignorant. We didn't know it was a rope. And our imagination, our mind, conceived the thought that it was a snake, and therefore superimposed the form of snake on that inert piece of rope. So how is that illusion done away with? It's done away with by inquiring. See? That once you inquire into the matter, then you can't help but find out that it is either a snake or a rope. You can't help but find out it is a rope once you inquire. So therefore, that's why Swami says that meditation is not enough. There must also be inquiry. All the sages say the same. Now, the illustration of the snake, then, is carried to every aspect of the world and every aspect of our lives. We are acting in ignorance of our true nature. And we're only going to find out what is the truth beneath that ignorance by inquiry. And by inquiry, we must challenge what we now think to be true, to find out if in fact it is true. Now, where we, according to Advaita, where we get confused and carried away is in our failure to understand the role of the senses and the sense organs. The mind, which is Maya manifest, is bound by the sensory organs, laboring. So Advaita tells us, and Swami has said in numerous occasions, the sealing on desires is a very easy, primary way of saying it, to people just to introduce them to the idea. But he says that the way to get free of that ignorance is to explore the fact of sensory experience. That is, to see the defects of that which we acquire in the world in order to satisfy our sensory craving. Almost any object that we acquire will in time change and will become not a source of pleasure but a source of pain. The bottle, which gives pleasure in drinking, if continued, results in drunkenness. The young lady sees her hero, and they are married. In a few years' time, he becomes a jerk, not a hero. And divorce sets in. The beautiful car, the first time the clutch goes, it loses all of its beauty. So if we will examine the objects of the world and see that the pleasure that they provide us really is very temporary and in fact will lead to various unhappinesses and sufferings in our lives, then as we see that, we can become detached from that process. And detachment is essential because only if we are detached can we observe correctly. Bill, what time is it?
25 minutes left.
25 minutes left. All right, I think we'll stop the lecture on Advaita now, and we should now have some questions. So let me just summarize for Advaita then. In terms of the practical application of Advaita, you have to ask yourself, is my conviction that I am a separate individual person living in this world under adverse circumstances, is that true? You have to challenge that concept. Swami, and remember what Swami says, that that is not true, that you are in fact God, that you are all beauty, all glory, all magnificence. He says that when you realize and see your own beauty, then you are free and realized, because nothing else can compare to the beauty and the glory of you, the divine person. And the way to achieve that divinity is to just deny, flatly deny, the validity of other ideas, which have been propagated and put in your mind by other people, starting when you were born by your parents, by the newspapers, by the magazines, by schooling. It's been pounded into us from the earliest days that we are limited individuals. Swami says, absolutely not true. We are the unlimited universal consciousness. And therefore, if we realize that, even though the events of the physical world continue as they did before due to karma, yet they do not affect us because we are detached. We take the position of the witness, the divine witness, seeing all the play of the world before us. Swami said that we should think of ourselves and see ourselves as actors in a play, playing a part, but on our way home to God. That is how we should see ourselves. And that will occur only if we take such statements seriously and start to examine to see whether or not all the things we spend our life desiring and acquiring, if they really give the satisfaction that we think they do at first. They don't. Therefore become detached. Start to make inquiry, take the position that you are God, you are divine, you are magnificent, you are the glory of the whole universe. Swami says that the person of himself, the person of Swami, is just an infinitesimal part of the glory of God. and that we are that full glory. So deny that we can be described as persons. Deny that our life is circumscribed by the things that happen to us. Deny that the thoughts that we think are genuine. The only thing genuine in the whole process is this I, this feeling of I, which continues unchanged in the waking state, in the dream state, and in the deep sleep state. That's which continues, that I which continues. That is what we should look at. They tell us to say, I am Brahma, Tat Tvamasi, that am I. But the I is there. So why should we say, I am that, I am Brahma, when I is already Brahma? So look to that in one's life, which is permanent, which is always there, daytime, sleeping time, or whatever, and give attention to that I. Follow that I to its source, where it arises, and this whole myth explodes. And then we can, according to Swami, we can then use all the objects of the world to their best advantage. We don't have to give up the objects, the cars, the houses, and so forth and so on. What we have to give up, if we wish to realize what we really are, what we have to give up is our attachment to those. Our attachment to them, not the things themselves. Detachment really means giving the best use to every object in the world, making the best use of every object in the world. Not to give it up and go away from it, but to free ourselves from the attachment to it and then use it, enjoy it, make proper use of it. It won't harm us at all. So that is an overall view of Advaita. And now we should have questions. Questions are much more important than anything that I can say, because what I say often goes in one ear and out the other, and I don't explain well enough or lengthily enough. But you have questions, and those are the important things.
How do you know when you're doing it right?
How do you know? The question is, how do you know when you're doing it right? You know when you consult your conscience. Swami says that the conscience is God in every person. Now, normally, we don't consult our conscience. We consult what other people say is right. What society says is right, or our parents say is right, or our wife or husband says is right. We don't turn inward and consult our conscience. If we put all of the things aside and ask our conscience, it will tell us if we're right or wrong. Next question?
I don't know if you answered it here, but since inquiry is a process coming out of the activity of the mind, isn't inquiry itself an illusion?
Yes, of course it is. You see, just as the illusion of sickness in a dream has to be cured by a dream doctor, likewise, the illusion of being bound in this waking dream world has to be cured by the illusion of the Master's teaching. Next one? Yes, sir?
What is the best way to understand when we're inquiring on something and it's actually coming from the conscience as opposed to mental chatter?
The question is, how can we distinguish between the conscience and what the mind tells us? Practice. See, so far we don't consult our conscience. What we should do is to sit quietly. Now, Swami gives an example. He says that if you have a question that you don't really know the answer to, and you've read Swami and still don't know the answer, then you can ask him directly in this way. Sit quietly for about 20 minutes and think only of Swami as being in the heart, as being your reality. Think of him. See his form. See his face. Remember his sayings. Every time the mind starts to wander away, bring it back immediately to thinking about Swami in one way or another. Then after 20 minutes of that, concentrate fully on Swami, ask the question. And within a short time, your mind will be clear and you will know what the answer to the question is. Or better, how about from the lady's side? All right.
You said we have to follow the eye to the source. And when we do this, for some distance, we're aware still of the duality between the eye and looking to the source. After a certain time, this becomes a very heavy burden, and but we realize that we still can't make it all the way, or we have not made it all the way. How do you rid yourself of this burden? It seems to me that there's some other kind of quantum leap that you were speaking of.
Yes, the lady. I'll repeat the question. Yeah, the lady says that trying to find the source of the I becomes a task, a burden. You see, it isn't that you try to find in words or in concepts the source of the I. It's just that you give your attention to your feeling of beingness. Now, you see, nobody has to tell you that you're alive. You don't even have to look in the mirror to know that you're alive or that you exist. Okay? You know you exist. Okay? So to trace down the I simply means to stay with that feeling, that primeval feeling of beingness. Deep, just follow it deep into yourself. You will find, if you do that, that you come to an area of quietness where you as the questioner don't even exist. Just a vast, endless area of quietness and peace. See, it's just like if you want to know that you are God, then you must concentrate on that idea, and you will transform yourself into God because you are already God. In following the I to find its source, you are that source. You are simply giving room for that which you are to come forth and make itself known. Try that. Next question? Lady side?
If all of us think ourselves as God, won't we all be walking with the big ego? Where do you differentiate between God and I?
Say it again, dear. I didn't quite hear you.
If we all walk with that idea, we are all God.
We have the idea we're not God, yes.
If we think ourselves as God, won't we all be walking with a big ego?
Yes, she says that if we have the feeling now that we're God and now we declare we're God, isn't that going to be a big ego? A tremendous ego, in fact. Yes, I would think there would be that danger. But you see, to get to a new land, you must pass through dangers. Dangerous travel. Swami will protect you. See? He says that I will be with you all the way. I will protect you. Turn to me, give your life to me, and I will save you. Nothing will happen to you. So in any of these exercises or inquiries that you make, dedicate the inquiry to the Lord and hold his hand while you're making them. Keep him by your side. Then no problem will arise. That question? Or men's side?
I never heard Rama or Krishna that might have Jesus or Muhammad materializing objects. How is it Baba chose the route of materializing objects and vibhuti before public?
The question is that he doesn't know that Krishna materialized objects or that Jesus did. So how come Swami materializes objects?
Is there any significance? Is there any significance for doing that?
Yeah, is there any significance in that state? See, all we know about Swami producing objects is that he says it's part of his nature. Now yogis, I have been in Burma and India so long, I know yogis in both Burma and India who can produce objects, just like Swami does. See? But, now for example, the ex-governor of Goa, Nakul Sen, told me that there was a fellow who belonged to the court circle there, and he would always have him in when there were guests. This fellow could stand in a circle of maybe 25 people, and he could create 25 different objects, each object being exactly what the person wanted. See? But, said Nakul Sen, he could do that only after praying to the goddess Durga. See? Only after praying to Durga. Now, other yogis engage in yogic exercises to develop those psychic powers. But Swami says that with him it's natural. There's no necessity to practice, no necessity to think. He says that he walks along and the idea occurs to him that he would like to give this lady a japmala. As soon as the idea occurs, there's the japmala. And he does it, he attaches no importance to it. He says that is no sign of divinity, which it isn't. It's duplicated in many parts of the world. No sign of divinity. It's just to please the devotee and make the devotee happy. So the devotee will perhaps listen to Swami and do what Swami really wants the devotee to do. Next question?
Where do the human values fit into the context that the only thing that's genuine is the sense of I-ness that's there?
Yes, the question is, where does human values fit in to the sense of I-ness? You see, Swami says that in regards to our Sai organization, there are two things to keep in mind. One is not to get involved in money, don't get involved with government, don't get involved with power. That's one thing. The second thing is to do only that which is within your capacity to do. You have a limited capacity as a human person. Only do that which is within your capacity to do. And he said, rely on yourself. The Atma doesn't need any help. All right. Then he said that the purpose of the Sai organization is that its members may live an ideal, joyful, happy life. And therefore, we should give careful attention to the ideals of the Sai organization so that we can live ideal lives which will serve as an example to others and therefore help them to also live ideal human lives. Now, in regards to seva, the primary seva is do not harm another. That's the basis of seva. You may think that's a silly, small statement that has no power at all. Just think, at this moment, at every moment of the day, are there not screams of agony rising to the sky all over the world from what ill that one person is doing to another? Screams of agony from all over the world. Suppose that today, that one small, silly little statement, don't harm another, were adopted. Would it not be a new world tomorrow? What a change, a worldwide change, with just that one small thing. Okay? So first, work no harm upon others. Then, if you can conceive of the fact that Swami is not only in your heart, he is the reality of every person that you see, then if you see someone in distress and it's within your capacity to help, why not help? How can you not help? You're serving Swami. Swami says, I don't need your help with the world. God made the world. He's perfectly competent to look after the world. He says that when you do seva, do it to God within that person. Every person, the only reality of that person is God. Therefore, do seva to God. You can't get up in his room, at the mandir and massage his feet and prepare his meals. You can't serve God that way. But you can serve God in another person. Now I think it's time for lunch, so let me bring the...
You got about 5 more minutes. You got about 5 more minutes. I was just going to make sure that you defined seva so that people realize, some people don't know, that's a Sanskrit term for service, community service. He's gotten into the habit of saying seva, but it's service that he's talking about. Go ahead, Bob.
When Swami saved your life in the car, he said that, Hislop, it took me longer to come to you because you weren't calling for me. Now, how is that in terms of this illusion and free will and knowing the future and this kind of thing?
You see, what he said was that you were so shocked. I don't know whether you know the story of the car or not. Well, very briefly. We were coming back from Vrindavan to the hotel in the city, and there were 6 people in the car. Myself and my wife, New Yorker and his wife and the daughter. They had come from New York to rescue their daughter from the hippie community in India and took her back home. And they forgot, so they asked could they ride in our taxi back to town. We said sure. So 6 of us in the car. Now the taxi driver is in a hurry always. And so he came up behind a bus and peeked, you know, they passed on the right-hand side, peeked around, saw a light, but figured it was a stationary light. And so he pulled around and stepped on the throttle. Well, you know what happens when you step on the throttle of an Indian car. Nothing much happens. You all had experience, I see. All right. So we started to pull around beside the bus. Then it was evident that he had made a terrible mistake, that was not a stationary light. It was a light of a vehicle moving at a fast rate of speed. Now, when you're faced with a head-on collision, one car will at least take to the ditch because it'll be less dangerous than a head-on collision. But that couldn't happen. On our left side was the bus. On our right side was a high row of road repairing material. No way to get off the road to the left or the right. Inevitable collision. So we, you know, shut our eyes like that, you know, we're dead. But then nothing happened. So we opened our eyes. And there we were going around the front of the bus. We looked quickly behind us through the windshield, and there were the lights of the other car receding behind us. So when we saw Swami the next morning, I threw myself at his feet and said, Lord, you saved our life last night. He said, yes, 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 that was very funny, wasn't it? And he said, you were so shocked you even forgot to call on Swami. But Swami saved you anyway. And then he turned to a group of Telugu people sitting along the wall of the veranda, and in Telugu told them the whole story. That was what happened there.
Was the driver conscious of that experience afterwards?
Oh yes, he couldn't figure it out. We asked him. A taxi driver usually can answer any question, huh? But he couldn't figure it out, no. He couldn't explain it. I think we're 5 minutes, we're shot now. One more? Okay.
Dr. Hislop, a lot of times we make the statement we cannot receive liberation without God's grace. And when we make that statement, without God's grace, and I know if we say nitty-gritty all the time, or inquiry, does that mean that God's grace from within us is going to intercede and give us liberation, or are we looking to Swami to say one day in words, you are liberated?
Yes, the statement is that Swami has said that now you are entangled in all this mess you created for yourself. You know, like Hardy and his old pal. What a mess. And he says, but Swami will save you. Only Swami's grace will save you. Now, what he means there is the same thing he said, that there is the Atma, there is the spiritual teaching, there is the longing for enlightenment. But yet, a teacher must come to convey that sacred information to you, that sacred teaching to you. That's the sense of grace. That is, Otherwise, it wouldn't occur to us. The perfect illustration, I think, is a child at the seashore when the waves break and there are bubbles, and these bubbles reflect the sun and are beautiful, varied colored bubbles. The child runs down and picks up a handful of bubbles and comes to father and says, "Daddy, I want to take this home with me." And the father says, "Yes, son, I know, but I have to tell you, that's just water, and in a moment it'll be gone." Now, that would never have occurred to the child, you see, by himself. The guru had to come and convey the teaching to him. So in that case, the father was the guru. In the same way, Swami's grace is bringing us this teaching that we read every day in his discourses. In that way, his grace. Otherwise, it wouldn't occur to us. We would like the people in the middle of, the Mideast. What thoughts do they have of liberation? All they can worry about is how to dodge the next bomb. You see? Okay, I think now we'll. Okay, Sai Baba, thank you very much.